Okay, welcome everyone to our webinar on the YES journey. And what we're going to be looking at today is the process by which patients and physicians get to yes in prescribing a brand. And today's thought leadership is drawn from our brand builder solution and the FICURE framework within our brand builder solution. And I'll be giving a little bit of background on FICURE and brand builder as well. So the overall goal of this webinar series is to elevate the impact of the insights that we as insights professionals provide to our stakeholders. And the goal is to increase our strategic value, increase the return on investments that our organizations spend on insights, ensuring that they have a meaningful impact. And we'll do a quick welcome, talk a little bit about Brand Builder and FICURE, talk about the YES journey itself, and touch on our FICURE beta tool, and finally, time for Q&A. Just a quick introduction to myself. I am a principal at ZoomRx. I lead our launch insights practice, and our brand builder team have been around for a number of years and have worked on a number of launches. As I mentioned, today's thought leadership content is drawn from our brand builder solution. Brand builder is our solution for launching brands and for optimizing post-launch brands. And within our brand builder solution, our brand strategy framework is FICURE, and FICURE is a framework that we'll be looking at today to talk about the YES journey. And within that YES journey, the FICURE is the why, or the YES journey is the why within FICURE. And FICURE is our acronym for the 7 dimensions of a successful biopharm brand. And we found that when brand teams can successfully answer questions across these 7 dimensions, can provide clarity on these 7 dimensions, it tends to drive brand success. And PHYCURE, P being the patient target, so answering questions about what characteristics identify patients that are good candidates for a brand, H being the HCP target, and what characteristics identify physicians that are most likely to prescribe in higher volumes. Y being YES journey, and that's where we'll focus on today in terms of the decision milestones and influencers that shape prescribing decisions. C being a competitive landscape and understanding what other treatments do target physicians and patients consider when making prescribing decisions. U being unmet needs and understanding the functional and emotional needs that are not sufficiently met in the marketplace. R being rational benefits in terms of the unique and relevant functional outcomes for a brand, and E being those emotional benefits, the emotional or higher order benefits that a brand brings. And by answering these 7 questions, by providing clarity on these 7 questions, we've seen that it drives brand success. And today we'll be focusing in on the why in our FICURE framework, or that YES journey. So what is that key question that we're going to be answering today? We want to provide insights that answer this question of what are those decision milestones and influencers that shape prescribing outcomes? And strategically, why are we doing that? It's because within any sort of promotional campaign or promotional tactic, we want to identify those points of influence in the journey where we can intervene to nudge a patient or a physician towards our desired outcome, which is usually prescribing. And by mapping those milestones, it helps us to identify those points of leverage in a promotional campaign. So just in terms of ZoomRx's perspective, when we think about the YES journey, our perspective is that it's critical to define both the lens and the scope of any sort of journey initiative. And today we'll be talking about both lens and scope. And so when we think about lenses, it's a question of whose journey are we talking about? And often that's the HCP or the patient, and we'll be talking about both of those today. but also realizing that the HCP and the patient exists within a larger context, within a larger healthcare system, and being aware of that health system lens as well. And then in terms of scope, is it more of a macro scope where we're looking at a journey over many, many, many years, or is it more of a microscope where we are looking at a specific point in that journey and really double clicking into that process? And by being clear about both the lens, are we talking about HCPs or patients, and the scope, is this a macro journey or a micro journey? Having that clear definition helps us to really map out a relevant and impactful yes journey. So as I mentioned, we'll be talking about both HCP and patients today. And let's start with that patient lens and talk about patient journey and patient journey insights. And why is it that we want to provide these patient journey insights? A couple of objectives, and the most important being that objective of patient centricity. And the biopharm community is always focused in on patient centricity, and understanding that patient journey is core to that patient centricity because it enables empathy. It enables our stakeholders to really live and walk in the shoes of our patients so that as they're making decisions, it's really through the lens of the patient's firsthand lived experiences. So first and foremost, it's about patient centricity. Also thinking about disease education, providing educational materials to patients, understanding what unmet needs they have when it comes to understanding their disease, and ultimately providing those educational materials that help to accelerate diagnosis or moving us towards other key outcomes. And three, branded promotion. From a branded standpoint, having those targeted tactics that, again, address unmet needs along the journey and accelerating patients to a desired outcome, usually talking to their doctor or requesting your brand. So when we talk about patient journey milestones, what do we mean by a milestone? As we're mapping out that journey, the milestones are the key points in that journey. And what do we mean by a milestone? What are we looking for within those journeys? And there are 4 distinct characteristics to a patient journey milestone. So one is it's a point at which the patient is making a key decision. They're going left or right. And those decisions are important because that's the decision that we as a brand team want to be able to influence. So first of all, a milestone is a key decision point. 2, a milestone has a discrete set of functional needs that the patient has within that milestone, so that we're understanding what are those needs that we as a brand team can fulfill. 3 is the emotional state. Again, the patient has a discrete emotional state at that milestone. Understanding those emotions are critical so that as we are speaking to patients, we're meeting them where they are. We're addressing not just their clinical needs, but also their emotional needs. And finally, milestones have discrete decision influencers. And it's important to understand those decision influencers so that, again, we can provide those little nudges to patients along the journey that nudge them in the direction of a desired behavioral outcome, like talking to their physician. And as we are executing patient journey research, as we're analyzing these milestones, these are really the 4 key questions that we want to understand is what are those key treatment decisions that are being made at the milestone? What are patients' clinical and therapeutic goals at that milestone? How are they feeling? And how are they actually feeling versus how do they want to feel? And finally, what resources do they consult in making those decisions? So those are milestones along the journey. And as we think about every patient journey is unique, and it's going to depend on the condition. It's going to depend on the unique patient, and every journey is unique. And also, there are some common milestones that tend to occur across therapeutic areas, across patient types. And knowing what those common milestones tend to be gives us a blueprint for designing research to double click into any of those milestones. So the four most common milestones that we tend to see are one, symptoms, right? Those onset of signs and symptoms that might indicate disease, understanding how those signs and symptoms impact quality of life and activities of daily living. Understanding the resources that patients go to as they're experiencing signs and symptoms to understand the root cause of those signs and symptoms, and ultimately the emotions that patients are experiencing when they're in this state where they're experiencing signs and symptoms, but it hasn't yet been diagnosed, and some of that fear and confusion that can occur at that step. The second common milestone is diagnosis and understanding what HCPs are the patients seeing? What is that movement through different HCPs? What sorts of tests are those HCPs conducting diagnostically? Ultimately, who is that physician that makes the diagnosis? And again, how is that patient feeling as they're moving through the diagnostic process, perhaps moving from physician to physician, test to test, and recognizing some of those challenges? Three, moving into treatment, which is understanding the other treatments that are considered, understanding the decision drivers that tend to impact treatment selection, looking at access and fulfillment of treatment, and again, emotions. And then finally, ongoing maintenance and getting into questions about compliance with treatment, understanding what tends to drive treatment switch or move from one line to the next within a treatment algorithm. Thinking about disease progression and how that disease progression further impacts life, activities of daily living, and some of the support resources that patients address, or some of the support resources that patients look to as they're managing their condition. So as I think about some of the methods that we can leverage to really understand this patient journey, we really have a rich tool set at our disposal. Increasingly, patient ethnography is done digitally as the digital tools have improved over the last couple of years, as COVID has moved us away from in-person ethnography and into the digital realm. These digital diaries capturing videos and photos and audio recordings to help us understand the patient's lived experience in their environment. Digital ethnographies are really, really powerful. And that's not to say that in-person ethnography certainly is still a tool, and being able to sit with a patient or their loved ones in their home or in their lived environment can also be really, really powerful. And complementing ethnography, those passive observational methods, with in-depth interviewing so that we can probe to understand what the patient's experience is, what their emotions are. It's a really nice complement to ethnography. And finally, patient HCP conversations. And ZoomRx has a really powerful tool that enables us to listen live to real-world in-clinic conversations that we can really understand what those discussions look like between the HCP and the patient. And we can capture those recordings, analyze those recordings. And again, it provides a really interesting lens into the patient journey. So let's switch our lens over to the HCP and thinking about why the HCP prescribing process is really important. One, at the end of the day, the HCP is that ultimate prescriber. They're the ultimate decision maker or the buyer for a product, and understanding that prescriber perspective is obviously critical. Two is thinking about unbranded disease state education, defining kind of the problem that needs to be solved that will eventually be solved by our brand. And three, similar to patient, branded promotional activities for HCPs, identifying targeted tactics that address their unmet needs at a particular decision milestone to accelerate physicians towards our desired outcome, which is usually prescribing our brand. So we'll take a look at a couple different scopes on addressing the HCP journey. And we'll start with the broadest scope in terms of how patients move through our healthcare system as they have touch points with the four key stakeholders as we think about healthcare stakeholders of patients, prescribers, pharmacy, and payers, kind of the 4P, how those patients touch each of those stakeholders within a healthcare system. So mapping out how patients enter into the healthcare system. What is that entry point? Is it a primary care doctor? Is it a specialist? What's that initial physician that they're talking to? What is the treatment setting? Are they coming in through the community or an academic center, or perhaps even a center of excellence for a rare condition? And what are those referral patterns throughout the healthcare system? And then really beginning to hone in on who is that prescriber. So who's the specialty that is the prescriber? Is that primary care? Is that a specialist? Looking at the influence of allied healthcare professionals, a nurse practitioner or a nurse educator or a dietitian that can often influence prescribing decisions, and looking at the diagnosis and prescribing process overall. 3, looking at how patients then move into interacting with the pharmacy. And is that more of a retail environment versus a specialty pharmacy fulfillment scenario? Looking at branded versus generics, especially given the rise of biosimilars and even branded generics or branded biosimilars, and looking at that dynamic within the pharmacy and managing ongoing refills through the pharmacy. And then finally, payers and understanding how patients interact with payers, especially when it comes to costs and formulary and out-of-pocket cost, how patients might or physicians might navigate prior authorization, as well as patient support programs. So that's the broadest lens through which we can look at the HCP journey of how patients interact with each of these stakeholders. As we zoom in a little bit, we can also look at real-world claims data to understand prescribing patterns. And some of those key questions that we are looking to answer in claims analysis of treatment transition, right? What is the order in which patients are progressing from one line of treatments to the next as they progress? 2, what are some of the leakage points? And by leakage points, meaning if we think about the funnel that moves patients through to our desired outcome, what are the barriers, or what are the barriers to diagnosis or our desired treatment behavior, usually prescribing, where are patients kind of falling out of that funnel? And 3, prescribing archetypes, looking for those common patterns among physicians to identify personas or common archetypes where we can say, hey, there's really 3 or 4 most common prescribing patterns that we're seeing in claims data. And then moving in even more specifically, looking at the prescribing process for an individual physician and how the individual physician interacts with the patient, and mapping that out from the first visit, right? What's that initial catalyst that might lead a patient to come in for the first time? What are those symptoms or signs that typically catalyze that first visit? What are those referral patterns that physicians go through as patients move from one physician to another? What are those unmet needs or emotions that physicians have within that first visit? Moving on to diagnosis, right? And understanding the diagnostic tools or the tests that physicians are using, understanding how they're staging or classifying disease severity, and looking at the influence of guidelines within that diagnostic or staging process. 3, moving on to treatment initiation and looking at the physician's treatment goals. What objectives clinically, emotionally are physicians seeking to accomplish that tend to drive treatment goals? What other treatments are they considering within their consideration set? What are some of the patient considerations, patient characteristics that tend to drive prescribing? And again, always keeping in mind those emotions of how physicians are feeling as they're making that treatment decision. And lastly, moving into ongoing management and how physicians manage patients chronically over time, looking at what might catalyze a switch from one treatment to another and the considerations that they have in that switch. And again, understanding some of those patient factors that drive ongoing management. So we've talked about both the patient lens and the HCP lens. We've talked about several different scopes through which we can think about the yes journey. And the thing that I hope you take away from today is not trying to boil the ocean with a match, meaning that sometimes with patient journey, we see companies trying to do everything, trying to look at both the macro and the micro, looking at both patients and HCPs. And sometimes that effort to boil the ocean with a match comes with the cost of kind of generic insights. And what I hope you take away is to have a really focused lens to say, is this more about understanding the patient perspective or the HCP perspective? And to have a really focused scope to say, are we really needing to map out the entire journey, or are there micro points within that journey where we really need to deep dive? And by having a focused lens, by having a focused scope, we see that biopharm companies tend to see more value in their investments in yes journey insights. So I'll pause here to see if we have any questions. If you do have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and I'll just turn to the chat here to see if we have any questions coming in. I don't see anything, and so I think we have addressed all of the questions for today. Just to leave us with FICURE, if you're interested in learning more about FICURE, we've created a beta tool that allows you to identify current hypotheses across the 7 FICURE dimensions, identify knowledge gaps or key questions to answer. And this tool is a really nice way to synthesize existing insights, to identify knowledge gaps to drive future research planning. And again, this is a beta tool. We'd love to find some partners that would be interested in experimenting with this. If you're interested in using the FICURE beta tool, feel free to contact me. I can be reached at dan.callahan@zoomerx.com. So I think that is everything for today. Just wanted to thank all of you for attending and look forward to engaging with all of you in the future. Thanks, everyone.